But I do strongly believe that Ethereum has always taken this very opinionated and uncompromising approach and ethos. And this is just something that hopefully it's going to win over everything else, right? And I think everything taken together allows us to think really big. Think really big about the future and the transformation that we can bring. Essentially, the not just the space of finance, but in general to the space of what I would call trustless compute. So I'm extremely bullish long term, and everything else is noise, essentially, right? So the price actions, all those wars on Twitter that you can see, it's all noise, right? Long term, I think, and I strongly believe that the future of the Ethereum community is super bright.
Welcome to the Edge Podcast. I'm DeFi Dad here with Nomadic. Today's show features the founder of L2BEAT. So we talk a lot about Ethereum L2s on the Edge Podcast. We thought it is time that we have an episode dedicated to talking about the performance metrics around L2s. And there's no one better to speak with than L2BEAT. They are similar to a ratings agency to track the performance of Ethereum L2s, to measure the decentralization and the trust assumptions around Ethereum L2s. And so hopefully this is a guide to bring you up to speed on the state of some of our favorite L2s and how they can continue to evolve so that they can best borrow from the trust and security of Ethereum mainnet.
Yeah, coming into this one, I was trying to think what a Web 2 counterpart is for L2BEAT. So what exists out there that people might be already familiar with that plays maybe a similar role to L2BEAT. And one of the ones that I thought of was Rotten Tomatoes, a movie rating site that I've used for forever. But I remember it was really small, when I first started using it. And now, obviously, most people, I would say, have heard of it. And you think of when something starts small and gets this big and has this much influence over people's actions, you just immediately assume that there must be an incredible amount of pressure on them to, sway or move away from their morals or their principles, or take money for better reviews, or take money to be, reviewed more favorably. But we get into this a bit with Bartek and just, their unwillingness to ever be paid for putting a rollup up on their site.
I think that we're in the place we are with the L2 roadmap because of the work that they're doing. It's a thankless job. They are pushing for radical transparency around Ethereum L2s. They are a self-funded organization. So we will share this in the show notes and we share it during the podcast, but make sure you check out L2BEAT.com/donate. They've not asked us for any donations, but Nomadic and I feel that, again, we should be leaning into supporting teams like this that are pushing Ethereum in the right direction. So before we get started, just a quick reminder, you can subscribe at the-edge.xyz. That's the best place to subscribe to the Edge newsletter and to get real-time notifications for the Edge podcast anytime we release a new episode. You can also check out our link tree at edge_pod. That's the best place to subscribe to the Edge podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. And then one last shout out to all of our sponsors that make the Edge podcast and the Edge newsletter possible. Sponsors like TOROS Finance and REDSTONE. Otherwise, we hope you enjoy the episode. Grow wealth exponentially. With TOROS leveraged tokens, when the market moves in your favor, your gains become parabolic. They're built to ride trends, auto-compounding profits. With TOROS, it's simple. Pick a vault, deposit, and your exposure is multiplied, maintained, and protected automatically against liquidations. TOROS reduces risk and keeps you in the market ready for the rebound. When markets dip, the vaults auto-adjust, softening losses and preserving your position. Just pick a token to multiply your returns. TOROS Finance, exponential gains with leveraged tokens. To learn more, go to toros.finance. REDSTONE is building the Oracle backbone to unlock real-world finance on-chain and next-gen DeFi. With modular gas-efficient feeds across over 110 chains, trusted by 170 clients, supporting over 1,300 assets, from value-accruing stablecoins, liquid staking and restaking tokens, to treasuries, private credit, and commodity tokens, REDSTONE delivers accurate real-time data where it matters most. The biggest platforms and protocols in DeFi today choose REDSTONE oracles, such as Athena, Securitize, BlackRock Biddle, Pendle, Spark, and Maple Finance. If you're building the future of finance on-chain, you need REDSTONE's leading modular blockchain oracle layer. To learn more, go to redstone.finance, and thanks to REDSTONE for supporting us here at the Edge Podcast and Edge Newsletter. Banks use your money to line the pockets of shareholders. Meanwhile, Solstice uses the same yield strategies to line your pockets. Introducing Yield Vault, Solana's best yield. A live delta neutral strategy with positive returns month over month for 3 years. Built for internet capital markets and powered by the stablecoin USX. To learn more, go to solstice.finance. Neutral is the next generation of crypto-native yield. Their synthetic dollar NUSD taps into OTC arbitrage, funding rate inefficiencies, and delta-neutral strategies to deliver premium, stable returns without taking market direction risk. Neutral is currently live in private beta and will be opening for public deposits soon. Learn more at neutral.fi. All right, let's introduce Bartek, founder of L2BEAT. Bartek, welcome to the Edge Podcast. How are you doing?
Great. Thank you for having me here. I'm super excited.
It's so good to reconnect. We got to spend some time together at HCC just a few years ago. Since then, L2BEAT has become one of the most reputable entities in the Ethereum community. We all look to L2BEAT to better understand the state of different layer 2s. We're going to try to catch folks up today on the state of Ethereum L2s and hopefully get them a little more comfortable with how to navigate L2BEAT. So why don't we start with more on your background? What brought you into the Ethereum community? What were you doing before L2BEAT?
Right. So my professional background is computer science. I hold a PhD from a university in Australia, and I used to work in a traditional software house, building software for traditional finance institutions. And I guess looking for the edge, I became interested in, broadly speaking, blockchain technologies, right? So I did a lot of research, and then I ended up with Ethereum full-time, actually working with MakerDAO, which, as most of you guys know, is probably one of the first serious DeFi projects that was built on Ethereum. And when I was working there, it was extremely cypherpunk in a way, and they paved the way for a lot of stuff that, I strongly believe in today, about how smart contracts on Ethereum should be developed. So after 5 years, essentially inspired by some needs that we had at MakerDAO, I founded L2BEAT as a community resource of sorts, if you like, right? And this community resource, we've been running this for the last couple of years, and it really grew into something that I would never have imagined, right? It's just, indeed, we became almost an essential part of the Ethereum rollup-centric strategy. We keep L2s at check. We kind of look at their shoulders, whether they like it or not. And I think this service is kind of essential. I have this, strong belief that if not that work, we would have potentially thousands of L2s. Most of them would be extremely insecure, and some sort of a chaos probably would be common, right? So we can explore this topic a little bit further in our conversation, but this is more or less the background of the service. And this is how it started.
Before we talk more about L2BEAT, talk to us about the direction of Ethereum. Like, do you think we're headed in the right direction?
I guess people in this space, often argue whether blockchains should scale vertically or horizontally, whether they should pack more and more transactions, into essentially what we call a layer one, right, into the base layer, or we should build blockchains vertically, creating some sort of a stacked tech, which would allow us to put more and more data and transactions on blockchains by essentially having, tiered approach. And frankly, my personal opinion is that there are physical limits to horizontal scaling, and there are decentralization concerns, right? Because the more you scale horizontally, the more powerful servers you need to have to validate the blockchain, and suddenly, those centralizing forces, come into force. Hence, I kind of always personally liked the vertical approach. And this is why, we put a lot of effort into essentially supporting, the scaling strategy of Ethereum. Now, having said that, today it seems obvious that you kind of need both. And, with the ZK tech that wasn't available 5 years ago, but today, it's almost there. I think we can afford to have both, and that gives me actually hope that we've solved the scaling problem, right? We can literally put all the world's transactions on blockchain. Not just one chain, but, a stack of blockchains, each one extremely powerful and each one 100% trustless from the user's point of view. And we can talk about it. What does it even mean, that these systems are trustless? But the whole point is that at the end of the day, you don't want to really trust intermediaries, right? A couple of years ago, we had this great word, disintermediation, and I think it's still a goal for everybody. We should really disintermediate, right? That's what we're trying to do here in this space.
Bartek, I want to talk to you more about the ZK stuff, because I agree it seems like it's getting extremely close, if not almost there. But I want to go back a bit to just this idea you had when you realized a need to start L2BEAT. You kind of mentioned that earlier. What were these motivating factors that you were worried about that you're seeing in the L2 space? And then, how would you even describe what L2BEAT is yourself?
So L2BEAT started as a kind of a spreadsheet that I created, with properties of all these systems for MakerDAO. Because MakerDAO wanted to essentially scale outside of Ethereum and wanted to scale very securely and responsibly, right? Like I said before, MakerDAO was extremely cypherpunk. They did not like upgradable contracts. They did not like intermediaries. They wanted to be decentralized from day one. And, we really did not like the idea of bridges that require third party, right? Required trusting some kind of a third party, which is, by the way, the majority of the bridges today. And, at that time, more or less, this idea of rollups came out from the space, and the first rollups started to emerge. And I was actually, at that time, a person in MakerDAO tasked with looking at these rollups, assessing their technical properties and essentially seeing, whether they actually deliver on the promise that you can do such a scaling tech with integrity, right? Without compromising too much on decentralization, without introducing this intermediary that you would need to trust. So I put, took me a few weeks of research, maybe even a few months. I put all the data on the spreadsheet. And as you can imagine, only a few people in the whole world, looked in the spreadsheet, right? And maybe 3 people in the world understood what was written there. So then I decided, hey, with all that research, all that work, I want to make this data public because I think that might be actually useful for other people. So we created a website. And that was like, the first time that people actually saw L2BEAT, super simple website with all the data and the result of the research, right? And then we faced the explosion of these essentially smart contracts. And from 5, we got very quickly to 50. And then we ran into the problem, how to even maintain that, right? So today, having few hundreds of these systems reviewed on our website, I can say that probably 80% of what you can see is like behind the surface, right? Because what you can see is just the result of our research. What you don't see is super complicated engineering that allows us to actually manage this information, because what you see is up to date. You can check it yourself. You can click on every single system that you can see on L2BEAT, and you can verify every single claim on chain. That's like radical transparency. This type of radical transparency is something that's like super important for me personally, that really drives me to the space, right? I generally don't trust anyone. I don't trust people. I don't trust the tech. I don't trust anyone, really. But here I can check. If my traditional bank says that, they like liquid, I don't know. Maybe they are. Or maybe, they're fooling everybody, right? Including the regulator. And I've seen banks saying that they're like super liquid, and then, 3 months later, they completely out of money, right? We've seen exchanges, obviously, making public claims that they're super liquid. A few months later, they completely bankrupt, and founders are in jail, right? I mean, we all know these stories. And I think we can do better. We can do better because blockchain is not just about, decentralization, crypto, and whatever. It's about making claims that can be checked by anyone, really, right? And, I very much like, this property of blockchains. Like I say, L2BEAT today is this super complicated platform that monitors every single scaling tech for Ethereum, right? Which we call L2s. So we've got hundreds of them. They are all constantly being monitored. And I think on average, we get between 5 and 10 updates a day, and every single update, is looked at by researchers. You can see that in our PRs, we call them dailies, right? And some of the updates are very minor, there's like a little tweak in some kind of a multisig or whatever, but some updates are super major, right? They change one parameter, and suddenly the system is not as self-custodial as we would like it to be, right? So by one little upgrade, you can completely lose the rating. And what happens is that, they change some parameter, our monitoring system picks it up, looks at in our, like a MANTLE model and the database, and immediately what you will see is that on the website, you will see that the system changed to being under review, right? And then a few hours later, maybe a day later, there's like a new review, and you can see potentially a new rating, right? And I think this is essentially the crux of what L2BEAT is, and this automation, in my opinion, is just something that, first of all, it's allowed to. We can do it technologically, it's possible to build it because Ethereum is transparent, there's a lot of tooling and whatnot. However, the lack of such automation is, probably one of the main reasons why similar platforms have failed, and L2BEAT, not only it hasn't failed, but it's so super important today, right, in the community. Because, every single claim that we make, you can verify yourself.
It's an amazing product you've built, and I think it taps into the core ethos of crypto and why a lot of us are here. You said a lot of things in there, I love that this started from a spreadsheet and it's grown into what it is now, and then just this idea of you're basically shining a light on a lot of spaces that maybe don't want that light shone on them, but the ultimate benefactors here are the users and the people that get to see all the behind the scenes nitty gritty stuff that you guys are elevating up so we can all just see it easily and transparently. I was thinking about this before the podcast, and we talked a bit about this, but I was thinking about L2BEAT, and I was trying to think of just what the best Web 2 counterpart would be. So for somebody listening to this and they're like, okay, I'm starting to understand L2BEAT, what's like an example that you might go to be like, yeah, L2BEAT's a little bit like this in the Web 2 world?
So I guess it would be somewhat fair to say that we are a little bit like traditional rating agencies, although my lawyers say that, probably I should be very careful with this name. But we do have this rating system, which we call stages, right? And it's like super important because it allows anyone to immediately see, what is your level of decentralization, right? So in a way, it's kind of similar. On the other hand, we are considering ourselves a community-driven resource, right? We don't get money, for these ratings from the systems that are rated. So in that sense, we are very different from traditional rating agencies. In other words, rollups don't pay us to get a rating, right? So I think it's much fairer to say that the community pays us indirectly, but it's the community that pays us. And anyone who launches a rollup, they will have us on their backs, like literally the day after, right? They launch the rollup, and the day after, there's a rating, whether they like it or not. So that makes us way more similar to, I think one of you mentioned like a Rotten Tomatoes, something, right? People are launching a new movie or whatever, and suddenly you've got a bunch of critics, right? Writing good or bad. And then obviously, you have to like respect their opinion, and it's about the reputation of a given critic, whether you are concerned with the critique, right, or you don't care. So for years, I've been telling my team that we as L2BEAT are in the game of reputation building. It's super hard to build a reputation. It's super easy to lose one, right? So the core value, I think, for me personally and for the whole company is essentially integrity. This is like the super important, right? From this comes our funding model. From this is coming out the operational model, right? Everything that we do is based on this whole idea of integrity. So we don't, for example, comment on things that we cannot verify, right? You'll see other companies trying to rate bridges, on things like, I don't know, the level of documentation, or maybe, things that are intangible, if you like, right? We never do that, right? Because these things can change and we don't see them. Instead, we always look at, hey, here in the code, you can verify that this system does that, right? And this is the power of this radical transparency and the power of smart contracts. I mean, at the end of the day, the rollups are implemented as smart contracts on Ethereum, and we can verify that what they claim is true, right? So that would be I think the equivalent. And I think it's interesting to kind of like also realize what like happens socially, right? Like when we started L2BEAT, we went into a lot of fights, like social fights with different systems. Like I can name, few, they might not even want to be named today, right? But, we had a lot of Twitter fights with a few teams. Most of them are our best friends today. No one is fighting us anymore. It's like, it's kind of hopeless because, we can see immediately in the code, right, whether their claims are true or not. And, now the teams are way more careful. They even go to us before the launch, they like say, hey, we will launch in 2 weeks, do you mind having a look at, what we've done? There's a very, very different chemistry these days, right?
This episode is brought to you by MANTLE, pioneering a revolutionary new category called blockchain for banking by bridging TradFi and Web3 into one unified stack. With on-chain transactions, TradFi rail compatibility, and integrated DeFi features, MANTLE is reshaping how financial services work. Their flagship app UR lets users hold fiat and crypto all in one Swiss-backed account, making real-world finance usable on-chain. To learn more, go to ur.app and follow mantle_official on Twitter. As a DeFi investor, I turn to Maple for permissionless institutional quality yield in a single liquid asset backed by over-collateralized loans. Maple's SYRUPUSDC and SYRUPUSDT are now supported as collateral for enhanced yields on major DeFi liquidity hubs such as Pendle, Fluid, Camino, Jupiter, Morpho, and soon Aave. To learn more about Maple, go to maple.finance. It's a very hard-earned reputation. I think L2BEAT mirrors the best of Ethereum. There's a 10-year track record of uptime. It's not been easy. It's not been easy to maintain that uptime in the face of these major network upgrades. And that track record is not forkable by any other blockchain or L1, L2. So what you guys are doing with L2BEAT is, as you pointed out, it's so important. That reputation can be lost overnight. I think one of the parts of your story that I've wondered about then is, do you consider yourself a public good? What is your funding model then, since folks cannot pay to have their L2 rated?
So the core of what we're doing, we do consider it a public good. We, at the same time, we're looking for ways to fund ourselves outside of our core model, if you like, right? But I have to be honest that right now it's almost 100% public good, right? And maybe next year, maybe in 2 years, we might have a commercial wing, if you like, that will allow us to not rely so much on public funding, but that's not the case today.
I would love to see any of the L2s contributing to some sort of fund for L2BEAT and other public goods. It feels like something that gets talked about. I want to say that maybe a few of them are doing some bit of work like that. Gitcoin grants has always been something that we've all looked to in the community, but it's really important to the health of Ethereum, the future of Ethereum, that, we fund neutral, objective parties like L2BEAT.
So Bartek, just curious then, is L2BEAT something you're funding personally? Is it grants from the EF or something? How exactly do you keep the lights on with this?
So at the moment, we're almost entirely funded by grants, mostly from Ethereum Foundation, but a few other grant systems like Gitcoin, Octane, and whatnot. This year, we've also started a new initiative we call the Ecosystem Fund, where we invited the major L2s to be able to contribute. For us, it's an important statement of these L2s that they actually appreciate the work that we do. And you can see it on our page today that, we've got a new tab called Ecosystems. We've created, a specialized, dedicated pages that report the state of the ecosystem for these L2s. And the most important aspect of this initiative is that there are no kind of strings attached for us, right? So they cannot require anything from us. And we do provide them with additional services. However, there is no influence whatsoever of any shape or form. So for us, like I said before, this issue of integrity is crucial. And this core, I think that it will remain publicly funded, because as I said, we want to maintain this funding model where actually it's a community that pays for the service rather than the systems themselves. Having said that, the commercial leg that we are considering launching next year, that will focus maybe more on traditional players, on RWAs, things that are much more related to traditional finance, if you like, and we'll see where we go with this, right? But the general idea is that we'd like to use our tech that we've built over the years and try to apply this tech to maybe different areas than just looking at smart contracts that power L2s.
I want to pivot us the second half of this conversation to more on the state of L2s, like what is an Ethereum L2? How does an L2 derive security from Ethereum L1? What are the different stages of L2? So we're going to, really highlight all of the research and work that you've been doing. Before we do, we're going to flash this on screen. Once we get this into editing, folks can go to L2BEAT.com/donate. That's the best place to show your love and support for the work they're doing at L2BEAT. So in terms of Ethereum L2s, why don't we just start with what is an Ethereum L2? How would you define that?
Right. So for me, I know that everybody has a different definition, right? But we are very opinionated, and we kind of reserve the right to be opinionated on the topic. So for me personally, L2 is any tech that wants to scale Ethereum, and there are different shapes and flavors how you can actually do that, and design space is huge. But generally, when I explain this, to people that come from more of a traditional finance, I always say that, hey, look, in traditional finance, when people are paying for a coffee in Australia, for example, right, your bank in Europe doesn't need to know about it, right? And this is how we scale a traditional system, that, we've got central banks, and you and I cannot open an account in the central bank. Instead, it's other banks that are opening the accounts in the central bank, right? And we open accounts in those commercial banks. So we have this, two-tier system in traditional banking. I think in some cases it's actually more. It's like 3 or even 4-tier systems where, there are central banks that talk to each other. These are kind of equivalent of L1s in a way, right? And then we've got commercial banks that talk to a central bank. They do what we call a settlement, essentially. And this way, the central bank doesn't need to have billions of accounts. They only need to manage, thousands of accounts, right? And this is how traditional world is scaling, and this is how Ethereum wants to scale. We don't want everybody to use, L1, right? And the old enough remember the CryptoKitties, one of the first, crypto games that almost like not killed, but, they completely plugged the Ethereum, right? No one could do anything really. Suddenly Ethereum slowed down and it was extremely expensive to use, and everybody was looking for a solution to this, and this is how L2 came to be. And now the main challenge is how to make them trustless, right? How to create an L2 blockchain, which is another blockchain, obviously, and how to make it so you don't need intermediaries. So the traditional banking did not solve this problem, obviously, right? You do need intermediaries. You do need to trust them. When the banks do settlement, you do need to have a trusted system, which is completely opaque. And if they do something crazy in this, we would never know, essentially, right? Whereas what we want to do is to do it in a trustless way and a transparent way, so that anyone can launch L2. It should be completely permissionless, and we should be able to trust that, by sending money to this L2 is safe, right? That's what we want. And for me, L2 is a scaling tech. However, it should be built in such a way that, it removes the intermediaries, right?
When I think about where my DeFi portfolio sits, to this day, the largest portion of that pie is still on Ethereum mainnet. I have expanded that to, Arbitrum. I've used Optimism, Mantle, ZK Sync, Base, but I still find L1, to be the place that I'm most comfortable. That said, it's important that, we keep up with all this research that you're doing, because as these L2s progress and mature and evolve and, truly realize being a trustless extension of Ethereum, I want to move more liquidity to these L2s. I think the big question for most of us has been, how does an L2 then derive security from Ethereum L1? It sounds amazing. Robinhood is going to launch an Ethereum L2, I think built on the Arbitrum stack. I'm not sure if that's an L2 or an L3, but anyways, it's amazing because they are a corporation, and I do not trust Robinhood like I trust Ethereum L1. But by becoming an L2, and if what you're saying is that, the goal is to build this, quote unquote, the right way so that we can ultimately trust that L2 because of the trust and the security it borrows from Ethereum L1. So how does an Ethereum L2 derive its security from Ethereum L1?
Okay, so before going into the details, this is somewhat complicated, but I think it can be explained, precisely. Let me just ask you first a question. Like, you guys are long enough in the space to remember the DeFi summer, right, where all the craziness began. And you've mentioned that you feel quite secure with your ETH on Ethereum, right? But let me be more precise. I mean, the ETH in your EOA or multi-sig account, whatever you use, to keep your ETH, that's definitely super secure. But did you feel the dread of sending the ETH into all these platforms that popped up during the DeFi summer, starting with Compound initially, but then we had all sorts of, copycats, right, and clones, with all those strange food names and whatnot, the spaghetti finance, the sushi, the sashimi, the everything, right? I mean, you played with these platforms. I mean, what did you feel back then?
It was high risk. I still to this day view everything as high risk, except for the smart contracts that have, been battle tested with, let's say, tens of billions over many years. And even then, it's still not totally risk-free. The most risk-free thing I can do is hold ETH in my own self-custody Ethereum mainnet wallet. I guess another thing could be to run a validator and be staking ETH myself. But yeah, other than the likes of Aave is one of those now that's really stood the test of time, the V2 and V3 contracts. So yeah, it's like different layers of confidence that we've all experienced over the years. So yeah, I'd love for you to expand on this.
So this confidence grows with time, right? I guess, but with the number of audits and with general, I think, maturity of the space, clearly. And, this is no different with L2s, right? There will be times where you have a lot of them, hundreds of them, mainly untrusted, offering you potentially high yield. But when you want to park your money and you want to feel safe, you probably want to choose L2 that is battle tested and that's been around, for some time. And I always use this analogy of like a kind of a casino where, you put your money, you get some chips, right? In return, you go and play inside this casino, and then for whatever reason you disappear, for a year, right? With a bag of chips from casino. I don't know, you lost conscience or whatever, ended up in the hospital, or, and then you wake up, a year later, and you go back and you find that, there's no building, it's gone, right? It's been demolished. it's gone, and you're left with all these chips. And now the question is like, where's your money, right? Because the chips are obviously worthless. And I think when I think about these scaling solutions, I want them to be built in such a way where I can come back, even if they're out completely, the light's gone, right? But I still have this bag of chips. I still want my money back, right? That's what I want, really. And this is no different from like depositing money into a traditional bank and then withdrawing it. It's the same kind of thing. You're depositing money into your bank, then you disappear for 5 years, you come back, there's just no bank, right? Like, where do you go? That's what you want to have, right? So how do you achieve that? How do you actually, is it even possible to build, systems like that? Turns out that it is, and you need two components. And this is how essentially you scale Ethereum. These L2s, we kind of tend to think about them as having to do two things. One is related to what we call data availability, and we can go deep into what it even means, right? And the other one is what we call a proof system. So essentially, what you want your commercial bank, which is your L2, right, to inform your central bank about every single transaction that took place, so that we don't have to trust that you keep all these transactions, right, when they need it. And then you want to prove to your central bank that you did the right computation, right? So in fact, now you want to prove to the central bank that your final balance sheet is correct. How do you prove it in traditional world? You do the audits, essentially, right? And you've got like thousands of people, like doing audits and the audit companies. How do you do it in Ethereum? You do the SDK proof, right? You do the advanced math, to actually prove that your computation was correct. So data availability is about the data for the computation, and the proof is essentially a cryptographic proof that your computation was correct, right? And having data and the proof, you can be safe. Like your L2 can disappear. However, having data and the proof of the correct computation, I can withdraw the money, right? That's the gist of it. So that's how you essentially scale the computation.
So Bartek, maybe this is a good time to get into these different stages. And did you coin these terms? Did you create these kind of yourself at L2BEAT, or were these already kind of standards that were out there in Ethereum land?
No, the stages system was originally proposed by Vitalik in one of the ETH research posts, and we took his post, we kind of refined it because it lacked certain details at the time, and we implemented it in a way, right? So originally it wasn't our idea, but as you know, obviously Vitalik has a lot of influence on the space, right? And generally his stage system, his stage idea is something that we took and we refined, if you like, right? But the original idea essentially is his. And let me just quickly describe what the stage system is. We've got like 3 stages. And essentially the idea is that stage 0 systems, they should have a proof system. However, this is still not fully decentralized in the sense that there is a multisig that controls certain parts of the operations. So essentially, systems that are stage 0, they still can be, for example, upgraded by a certain multisig, right? Or if there's a liveness failure, you may not be able to actually move your money out of the system. So in my analogy of this casino, when you come back and casino is gone, you may not be able to withdraw the money, right? If you have a stage 0 system. Like with the stage 1 system, you should be able to withdraw money even if the casino is gone, but we still allow multisig to be able to do the upgrades. And this is mostly done because of the risk of bugs. However, we require this multisig to be decentralized. It should be comprised from independent actors that are not directly associated with the team. So essentially, we call it the Security Council, these multisigs, right? And we believe that this is like a middle ground in a way. And I know that there's a lot of critique that, having such security councils, does not make your system decentralized. This is a common critique from other communities, right? But this is done intentionally to make sure that, if there's a bug in the proof system, the Security Council can override, right, this bug. It's like a higher level authority, if you like, but the system should be fully secured by the proof system, by smart contracts. And like I said before, if the operators walk away, you should be able to withdraw your money, right? This is stage one. Stage two removes this multisig entirely, right? So there is no higher authority whatsoever. The system is fully run by smart contracts. That's like the easiest way to think about it, right? So stage two, the system is run fully by smart contracts. Stage one, the system is run by smart contracts. However, there's a higher authority that can override. And stage zero, the system is run by smart contracts. However, there is no full functionality. For example, for you to withdraw funds if the operator walks away, right? So essentially, you have to trust, the operator, for the liveness of your funds, right? And in certain cases for the safety. There are a lot of nuances here, but this is more or less the gist. And this is designed so that there's a very direct incentive for everyone to move to at least stage one, right? In fact, at one point, you may be aware that the Ethereum Foundation, they want to promote stage one systems or stage two, right? They consider stage zero systems as some sort of a systems in the works, if you like. And stage zero systems are essentially such that, they are on the road to stage one, right? But they haven't reached, this level yet.
I got a quick follow-up to that. Just, looking at Arbitrum and maybe Base, they're both at stage one. Curious, what's your estimation on how long it'll take for them to get to stage two? Maybe it's not something you can comment on, but I wouldn't even know what they have ahead of them still as far as, meeting the standard and kind of qualifications. And then alternatively to that too, I did notice there's two stage two products on your site. So ZK.money and then this other one called Facet Bluebird. I didn't even know there was some teams that had already achieved stage two, so that's cool. But yeah, maybe starting with that first part of that question, just what does Arbitrum and Base need to do?
They would essentially need to get rid of the Security Council, or they would need to allow users to have at least a 30 days exit window in case there's an upgrade. And the upgrades can be only done by the Security Council, right? So upgrades are allowed, but there should be plenty of time for anyone that does not like the upgrade to essentially remove the funds, right? And we always have this scenario in mind where, for whatever reason, let's say Base introduces KYC for every single Base user, and you need to KYC your account to be able to withdraw, right? Such change, if introduced, and if Base was stage two, that would allow anyone a 30-day exit window, right? So if you didn't want, to be KYC'd, you would essentially have plenty of time to exit with your funds, right? That's the gist of the idea. Now, I personally don't think that big systems like Base they have enough incentives to be stage 2, and I'm not even sure if that's actually desired for them, considering that being stage 2 is actually quite risky if your proof system has not been like around, for years and you don't consider it mature enough, right? So getting from stage 0 to stage 1 is a no-brainer. We want every single system to do that. Getting from stage 1 to stage 2 is a bit of a debatable move, in the sense that it's like sealing your smart contracts, essentially, right? You have to be like super certain in your smart contract infrastructure that there are no bugs, and you should really trust your code. And to do that, you probably need your smart contracts to be formally verified and whatnot, right? And, I can definitely appreciate that projects are hesitant because if you remove the higher authority to override bugs, then if there's bug, the users will lose their money, right? All their money will be stuck, which we, by the way, saw in the early days of Ethereum, right? At that time, a lot of people were trying to build what we call immutable smart contracts, and because of mistakes, a lot of money has been essentially gone, and some of that funds are still stuck today in some of these smart contracts that are completely irretrievable, right? So my personal opinion is that Base might be actually hesitant to move to stage 2 because of these types of issues, right? The second problem is upgradability. The Ethereum keeps changing all the time, and the rollups wants to be able to upgrade. And that 30-day window that we require is actually quite long, and that's not an easy requirement to fulfill. And this is why we are working together with Ethereum Foundation on a concept called native rollups, and we were working on primitives that would allow L2s to upgrade along with L1 automatically without actually doing anything. So every time something changes on Ethereum, there's a hard fork, some new functionalities introduced by Ethereum, L2s will be upgraded automatically, right? This is what we call native rollups, and we hope that, when Ethereum introduces this feature, then it will be much easier to become stage 2, right? Now, let me just also add why we actually do see stage 2 systems. Both of them are somewhat experimental, if you like. They're not those full-fledged computational platforms. I personally consider them to be more of experiments that you can actually do it. We rated them to show the community that, yes, you can be stage 2. However, if you look at what they provide to the users and, how they function, you'll see that, they're not like universal computational platforms, right? One of them is exchanged with a very limited functionality. The other one is a fairly experimental rollup that, yes, it is technically stage 2, but they are even they're not that concerned, I guess, with this staging. I would say that they even incentivize the users to move funds through other bridges. And I'm not, frankly, even sure what is their strategy. But I still consider, them to be a bit of an experiment, right? To sort of stretch, the design and show everybody that you can build immutable smart contracts that are scaling Ethereum.
River is building a chain abstraction stablecoin system that connects assets, liquidity, and yield across multiple chains. Season 3 is live. Earn River points by using SAT-USD in DeFi such as Pendle, PancakeSwap, and Uniswap. Stake River points to accumulate more or convert points to River tokens whenever you like. To learn more, go to river.inc. Hey folks, I want to tell you about our sponsor GEARBOX, the protocol that reimagines on-chain lending. With GEARBOX, you can access 10x credit across DeFi or lend for passive yields with single asset deposits and no impermanent loss. Users can access leverage to margin trade, stake, farm, and more. To learn more about GEARBOX, go to gearbox.fi. Puffer Institutional delivers secure, high-yield Ethereum staking built for institutions with battle-tested security, granular access controls, and the ability to boost APY by securing multiple AVSs. Puffer gives institutions full control and optimized returns. Puffer is also behind the Unify-based rollup, aiming to transform Ethereum's future in a world where all L2s are working together. To learn more, go to institutional.puffer.fi. One topic we've been hearing more about in relationship to Ethereum L2s is a based rollup. We've had Puffer Finance on at least once to talk about this based rollup they're developing called Puffer Unify. I'm just wondering, more generally speaking, where do based rollups fit into your framework for L2BEAT?
So at the moment, we are mostly concerned about the security of these constructs. And we don't really differentiate so much between L2s that are using centralized sequencer, L2s that are using decentralized sequencer, or L2s that don't use sequencer at all, and they're using base layer Ethereum for sequencing transactions. And these are called base rollups, right? Base rollups are essentially rollups that are using base layer Ethereum for sequencing transactions. Each approach has pros and cons in a way, and I personally think that each strategy has its merits, and this is one interesting way to differentiate your rollup from the others. Having said that, regardless of which strategy you choose, that doesn't really affect the rating that we provide, at least the rating that we have today. Hence, we like from the point of view of the stage system, it doesn't matter, right? It's just like an implementation strategy of your how do you order transactions essentially? Like what entity is responsible for ordering transactions, and what is the consequence of that?
So given the merits of different approaches here with L2s, I'd love to know your thoughts on why did Robinhood choose the approach they're taking? I believe they're building on the Arbitrum stack. I don't know, again, if it's an L2 or if you would call that an L3. It was one of the biggest stories of the summer. I think there's a lot of signal in the fact that they are building on Ethereum. Credit to the Arbitrum team for getting them on board. I thought there were rumors that they were going to deploy something on Solana and that something changed. Those rumors are just rumors, but I believe that there was some real truth behind that. So I was pleasantly surprised to see that they opted to ultimately build on Arbitrum. And so anyways, if you can apply some of the research and thinking you do at L2BEAT to what's going on there, or what are some of the pros and cons to the approach they're taking? So
I'm not privy, to what exactly Robinhood is building, and why they have chosen Arbitrum and not some other platforms. I think from the business point of view, there's a lot of competition, obviously, right, between these L2s. However, I'd love to think at the end of the day that Ethereum today is by far the most secure and decentralized settlement platform, in the sense that it can be the base on top of which we can build other blockchains that can communicate between themselves without any intermediary, right? Like if you want to communicate between Ethereum and Solana and other L1s, you will very likely always need intermediaries such as Layer 0 or Wormhole, XLR, these types of projects, right? And, they've been around for years, and they seem to have become a standard of how blockchains operate, and they all require intermediaries, right? For good and for bad. Now, L2s, if built correctly, they don't require intermediaries to talk to Ethereum, and this is why maybe in the future, we're gonna see the large financial institutions to issue assets, and these institutions will use platforms that actually don't have these intermediaries, because intermediary typically in a regulated world means that you have to be some kind of a money transmitter. You need to have some kind of money transmitter license, right? There's a risk, obviously, that if this intermediary is an unknown entity, it may come from sanctioned countries and whatnot. If you don't require intermediaries, it's just smart contracts, right? It's code, essentially. It's immutable code, which cannot be influenced by anyone, really. So hopefully this is the reason, but maybe in practice, there are also business reasons why they've chosen Arbitrum over anyone else, right? Who knows?
Are there some L2 criticisms that you think are justified that, Ethereum and these L2s need to still work on?
I think the most common criticism that I've heard, and in my opinion, it's really a fundamental lack of understanding, essentially how L2s work, is of centralized sequences, right? There are a lot of people that say, hey, Base is centralized because it's got the centralized sequencer. Arbitrum is centralized because it's got the centralized sequencer. And, these people claim that systems that are more decentralized, like having maybe 5 validators or maybe 10, they like superior because 5 is better than 1. But the issue here is that the sequencer is just an entity that orders transactions, and for a very short time, because these transactions are then submitted to L1, to Ethereum, and they cannot be reorged, right? So for a very short time, and by very short, we are talking, less than a minute, typically. Indeed, the sequencer can like reorg, change the order of transactions, which may have certain impact on some use cases, especially related to trading, for example, right? The ordering is important for MEV and whatnot. However, once these transactions are posted to Ethereum, that's it, right? They cannot be reordered. And we claim at L2BEAT that once the transactions are ordered and they are sent to Ethereum, they are etched on Ethereum blockchain, they're final, right? If you can't reorder transactions, these transactions are final. And it doesn't really matter that it takes, a day, 2 days, or 7 days in case of Base or Arbitrum to reach what we call a final settlement. It doesn't really matter because Base cannot influence the outcome of the settlement, right? After this 30 seconds, as long as these transactions are sent to Ethereum and Ethereum knows about them, that's it, it's done, right? So for all intents and purposes, these transactions are final. I think this is the core of the main misunderstanding. Some people say, hey, Base or other, L2s are not decentralized because they have centralized sequencer. And also they say that, no, these constructs are not very useful because the settlement time is 7 days, right? But like I say, in my opinion, both claims are not true. So what claims are true? What is the main criticism that is true? And the main one that I find that is true is that indeed the stage 1 systems can be upgraded by the multisig, right? Now we can debate how we can construct these multisigs to make it decentralized. But granted, it's true, yes, stage 1 systems can be immediately upgraded by the multisigs. And some people claim that this makes these constructions essentially centralized because this multisig can steal all the money, right? Our response to that is that we want these multisigs to be big, and we want the entities on these multisigs to be public entities and geographically diversified and not related to the rollup operator. So I think this is the main critique that I would agree with. Yes, there is a multisig for stage 1 systems and obviously for stage 0. I certainly don't agree with the critique that there's a centralized sequencer and this is something inherently bad, and that settlement time of 7 days is unacceptable.
So aside from L2s, another broad topic that's very important to the mission at L2BEAT is data availability, or DA. What are your thoughts on DA? What can you tell us for those of us that are trying to catch up on the state of data availability?
Let's maybe first define more or less what it is before we dive a little bit deeper into this problem. It's actually a very simple concept when you think about it, right? Think about your traditional bank. You go to a bank and you check what is your balance, right? And the bank says it's $12,000, and you're like shocked. No, it's impossible, right? It cannot be $12,000 because I know for a fact that it's $65,000. How is it even possible, right? So you ask the bank, hey, what happened? You expect that they give you essentially the list of transactions. Maybe someone hacked your account, or maybe you spent this money on something that you don't even realize. I'm not really sure, right? And then the bank says, no, I won't tell you. I won't give you this data. You just have to trust me. It's not $60,000, it's 12, right? Like, how would you feel about it? I mean, you clearly see that if they gave you data, you would be able to recompute the balance, right? By looking at all the, money that flows in and out of your account, and then you see, oh shit, I forgot, I invested, some of this money, or maybe someone who had access to my account, actually they did that, they did not tell me, right? But you'll see. However, no one can imagine a scenario where, you say, you ask the bank, why my balance is $12,000, and they say, yes, it is, and we won't, give you the list of transactions. We are just so accustomed, right, to the fact that when you ask this intermediary for transactions, they will give it back to you. And of course, having all transactions, you can recompute everything, right, to verify if the final balance is correct. Now, with permissionless systems, there is no way, in a way, to force these systems to give you transactions, right? So you either trust them that every time you ask, they will give you transactions. And this is not acceptable, right? Because if you have a malicious operator, they may at one point tell the Ethereum, hey, your balance is $12,000, and they won't give you transactions back, right? Or you have to require them to host these transactions somewhere in a secure place. And what's the most secure place than Ethereum? There's none, actually, right? So essentially, the most secure constructions that we have on L2BEAT are transactions that are posting data to Ethereum itself, right? So these ones we call rollups, essentially, and we say that, hey guys, if you want your L2 to be super secure, and if you want your L2 to not rely on any additional intermediaries, you need to post all your transactions to Ethereum. You can compress them, you can zip them, you can make them really, really compressed. However, you have to post them to Ethereum, right? And Ethereum has this facility that was introduced not that long ago called blobs, which we say this is like an attachment to an email, right? In the very, very old days, there was no way to attach anything to the email. It was just plain text. But now you can obviously attach PDFs and movies and documents and whatnot. And this is how it works with Ethereum as well, right? Ethereum is just a database of transactions, but now we have what we call blobs, and these are like attachments, right? So rollups can just post to Ethereum this blob containing all rollup transactions. And Ethereum has a growing capacity for these blobs, right? And this is, again, done in such a way that we can safely scale the Ethereum. So we have more and more of such blobs, and this is by far the most secure setup. However, you may have so many transactions that there is no capacity for these blobs, right? And posting these blobs to Ethereum will like choke the Ethereum, in which case you have to post these transactions somewhere else. So ideally, you'd like to post them to some other decentralized system that will provide you with some guarantee that these transactions will be available. And we all know what these systems are, Celestia, it's Avail, EigenDA, right? So there are choices today. Typically posting these transactions to Celestia and the likes is cheaper, and the capacity of these systems is far greater. However, you need to trust Celestia, right? When you actually do that. So suddenly, you have essentially a two-system solution, right? So you trust Ethereum validators and you trust Celestia validators. Clearly this is a little bit less secure, or maybe that actually adds additional trust assumption, right, to the whole setup. And we call such systems validiums or optimiums. And then the third class of systems is where, projects are posting these transactions to some unknown servers, if you like, right? And we consider these systems to be completely insecure, because essentially when you really need these transactions and the operator refuses to give you back these transactions, you have to rely on their essentially honesty, right? So so this is like the problem of data availability. Essentially, some guarantees that transactions that comprise the state of the blockchain, if you really wanted them, they will be given to you on demand.
Bartek, you touched on ZK near the beginning of this podcast. I want to come back to that and just get your opinion on how big of a role do you think it's going to play in regards to ETH L1 and the rollups as well, and how soon are we to that future sort of playing out?
So I think it's gonna play the fundamental role. ZK is considered to be the scaling solution for blockchains, and in that sense, like we've mentioned before, that there are two main components of how rollups derive security from Ethereum. Right, first is data availability. You post transactions in a compressed form to Ethereum, and you get the same guarantees as Ethereum once you do that regarding the availability of the data. The other one is that you need to have this proof system, right? That allows Ethereum to verify that the state of your L2 is correct, that your computation that you've done on these transactions that you've just posted is actually correct. And there are two techniques that were developed. One is what we call optimistic, which is essentially you post a state and optimistically we assume that this is true, right? And if anyone can recompute the state, if they disagree, they can challenge, and the Ethereum will adjudicate. The smart contracts on Ethereum will then do this complicated computation on these transactions that were posted in a way, and Ethereum will determine, the smart contracts on Ethereum will determine who was right and who was wrong, right? So assuming that you've got an honest operator, there'll be never a dispute, obviously, right? However, this dispute is like something that is built in case the operator turns out to be malicious. Now, ZK is like the opposite approach, right? You post the state and you also post the proof with the state that the computation was correct. So this actually has some advantages. And the main advantage is that, once the state is actually posted and the proof is posted, and Ethereum smart contracts verify the proof, this can be, this is like final settlement on Ethereum, right? You don't need to wait 7 days for this final settlement to happen. And this is important for interoperability between these blockchains, right? So by far, we consider ZK to be like the future, but so far it was a complicated tech which was relatively slow, and certainly was kind of a bottleneck, if you like, right? You just needed to have massive amount of compute to create these proofs. That was expensive, and still, with Ethereum base layer getting faster and faster, and the demand for compute getting bigger and bigger, the ZK tech was always like too slow, if you like, right? However, that has just changed recently, and I think we're at the point where we can safely say that we can prove however big computation you want to have, and this way eventually I believe that probably if we have this conversation in say 5 years, every single rollup will be ZK. That's probably the future, right? So we kind of started from optimistic because it was easier. However, we will slowly move to ZK. ZK also gives you some additional super important property, which is privacy, which optimistic systems don't give you at all. And I think we're going to see next year, new constructions like Aztec, for example, right? New rollups that not only they will scale Ethereum, but they will also give you privacy. But this is a topic for a completely different conversation, I guess.
So before we start to close out, I would like to summarize for listeners, if all of this plays out, rollups have ZK integrated or have implemented ZK technology, and some of the trends we've covered all play out, what does DeFi look like for us as users? What are some of the benefits of using DeFi in the next few years? And by the way, this is all following on the heels of, this podcast recording is following on the heels of an announcement from ZK Sync that they have this Atlas upgrade for the ZK stack that allows for 15,000 transactions per second. The sequencer is 15,000 transactions per second, 1 second ZK finality, and it's 1/100th of a penny proving cost per transfer. So it seems really promising. I mean, it seems like we're going to be able to transact for, fractions of a penny, but also inherit all of the benefits of, having once transacted on something like Ethereum mainnet.
So I think the picture is super simple. Going back to my analogy of a bank, that when the bank claims that your balance is $12,000 and not 60, and they give you a graphic proof that that's the case, then it probably is. That means that whatever you thought your balance was, it's actually wrong, and someone with the authority must have signed the transaction, that you may not have been aware of. But the computation that the bank did is correct. You don't need to trust the bank. You can just verify the proof that they gave it to you, and you're done, right? And I think this is completely a game changer, because that is what I would consider a true disintermediation, right? Instead of having a super complicated and costly settlement system that right now the traditional banking is having, which, by the way, results in not only the fact that, if I want to send money from Europe to US, it costs $30, $40. It's like ridiculous when you think about it. It also takes 3 days, right? The settlement takes 3 days. What we're going to have is we're going to have super cheap settlement and very, very fast interbank transactions, right? So I would eventually see the big institutions, including banks, moving all to blockchains to do settlement between themselves, using blockchain technology rather than using the old traditional systems. And mind you, these systems were created back in 70s or something, right? Like Swift and whatever, these systems eventually will go, and that will lower essentially the cost of banking for everybody, right? But that will also open infinite new possibilities, like micropayments, like very small cost remittance. I think with this type of technology, the banking that we know today, I think eventually will probably change dramatically, for everybody in the planet. That's the kind of a future that I can definitely envisage, because, in many ways, it is a technological breakthrough, right?
Well, I think part of the reason that we're going to get there is because of the adults in the room, like you at L2BEAT. So just very thankful for the work that you and your team continue to do. And I think this is a great place for us to wrap up. So I want to remind listeners they should first learn more about L2BEAT by going to L2BEAT.com. Follow L2BEAT on X. You can follow Bartek's personal account. It's listed under bartek.eth. The handle there is his last name, which I won't be able to pronounce, but we'll put it into the show notes. I do want to say just once more, I want to emphasize, I think that the work that you're doing is the best representation of the Ethereum community. It's about the radical transparency, the objective truth that you face around those L2s. If you look at their X account, it says keeping an eye on L2s. It's very, very important that we have this. It's like a self-regulatory entity in the space. I saw years ago when you did have, certain disagreements or fights with L2s on Twitter, and, to your credit, by holding them accountable, I think the whole space has moved forward and, is competing for, truly achieving decentralization and censorship resistance and true trustlessness. So anyways, it's very refreshing. It's a reminder why we're all so enthusiastic and bullish on the future of Ethereum. And we would love to have you back in the future. Highly recommend that people go to L2BEAT.com/donate. Show them some support. If you are an ETH holder, an ETH investor, I think it's really important that we support our own. But on that note, Bartek, any final word for us before we go?
I think that, the competition, for worldwide settlement systems is obviously strong, right? But I do strongly believe that Ethereum has always taken this very opinionated and uncompromising approach and ethos. And this is just something that hopefully it's going to win over everything else, right? The Ethereum community has been amazing as a community. The radical transparency that I mentioned many times during this episode is just nothing that you're going to see in other communities because they just simply don't care so much about this. And I think everything taken together allows us to think really big, think really big about the future and the transformation that can bring essentially the not just the space of finance, but in general to the space of what I would call trustless compute as such, right? And I'm sure by, scaling responsibly, we can find infinite use cases for such trustless compute. So I'm extremely bullish long term, and everything else is noise, essentially, right? All the price actions, all those wars on Twitter that you can see, it's all noise, right? Long term, I think, and I strongly believe that the future of the Ethereum community is super bright.
Thanks everyone for tuning in. To stay up to date with future episodes, plus get expert tips, strategies, and exclusive content, subscribe to our free newsletter at the-edge.xyz.